Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and our continuing series, Sega Racing Renaissance, where we review every single mainline 3D arcade racing game Sega ever released in a retrospective fashion. And today we're taking a look at Daytona USA 3, the third, and at this point in time of recording this video, final entry in the Daytona franchise. And it's a really interesting game and a really interesting story as to how we're able to play it. But before you get too far involved, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, maybe the notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. Now, normally on all of these videos, I talk about how Sega refuses to port their arcade racing games to home consoles and computers. But Sega was very generous with Daytona USA 3, and that is because they uploaded an update to the arcade cabinet to their website for arcade operators to update the game installed on the PC in the cabinet. The thing is, Sega didn't obscure that link, and it wasn't just an update file, it was the full game executable. Therefore, Sega accidentally ported this game to computers. Apparently, Sega won't intentionally do it for us, but every once in a while they make an accident, and we get to play an arcade game that never got a home port. And the fun thing is, Daytona USA 3 is a relatively decent time. Now, this does not live up to the original Daytona, nor does it get anywhere close to Daytona 2 on the Model 3. But it is a fun game. If you read the internet reviews of this game, they're going to tell you it's a complete waste of your time and you shouldn't bother with it. I am not here to call this a hidden gem. I'm here to call it a solid B-tier effort by a Sega subsidiary that was not the original developer of the Daytona franchise. There is still a lot of fun to be had, and right off the top, it's a very pretty game to look at. It's those classic Sega primary colors, super bright visuals, and a lot of good graphical elements like when you go into the shade here. So at least it's a fun game to look at. It's just not what people expected out of Daytona 3. They thought they were getting a fully numbered sequel, but this recreates a lot of the tracks from the original Daytona in a more modern vibe. And I think people were just expecting to get, 6, 8 brand new, never before seen tracks from Sega with that Daytona theming behind it. So in that case, it is definitely a letdown. But if you ignore all that and just play it for what it's worth, it is a very competent arcade racing game. Now, you do have to do some fine-tuning of the controls because this was never intended on running on any modern PC. It was intended on running on a specific PC, so you do need to play around with the controls a bit. But once you get them dialed in to the best of your abilities, you will see here I am racing in first place and I am doing a relatively decent job of it. You can control the cars, they do slide a little bit, but it's that classic arcade handling that we do know and love. I've seen some complaints about the controls on this being broken. They're not if you fine-tune your analog inputs. If I can win a race on a controller on this game, then you should be able to as well. It does seem like some tracks though have slightly different physics. Something feels like it's going on here, because on the oval the car seems a little bit too responsive, and if you get tangled up with other drivers, you're basically going to lose all your momentum. This doesn't have the same fluidity as Daytona or Daytona 2. It definitely has a sense of speed dialed in though. This game runs fast at a locked 60 frames per second, and you definitely get the sense of momentum and speed. But honestly, the ovals never been my favorite thing about Daytona. But let's move over to a recreation of a classic track. You're going to see in a second Sonic the Hedgehog in that mountain right there. This is still a ton of fun. It's a new way to play an original course, and again, running in first place. This game gives you enough challenge to make you learn how to play it, but not so much challenge that you're going to run out of time on every single course. And that sometimes is a complaint of mine with some Sega arcade racing games, is you have to drive basically perfectly to not run out of time. With Daytona USA 3, it is more generous with its time limit, and we do have to appreciate that. Now, of course, we have to play against 39 CPU opponents. Normally in an arcade, you might have 4 or even 8 cabinets side by side next to each other, and you can play with individual humans. You're not going to get that here. But what you are going to get is an absolutely spectacular soundtrack, and that's because it's basically just the Daytona soundtrack used again. Listen for a bit and enjoy. can't say anything wrong about the soundtrack, but you can't say that they're doing anything new with the soundtrack as well. It's using classic Daytona tracks in a new game, and that was probably a smart choice because those are absolutely iconic. But seeing this course recreated in what at the time were modern graphics is an absolute ton of fun. That statue of Akira that you just saw about 15 seconds ago, everything looks really good, and that's what I really do enjoy about Daytona USA 3. It is a very pretty game to look at, and in some spots it's a very fun racing game to play as well. But it definitely does lose points on the fact that it really isn't trying too hard to do anything new. It's basically just a modern remake of some of the Daytona tracks when people were expecting a brand new game. But it is a good time. Like I said, this is not a terrible game. It is definitely worth your time playing. It is not a hidden gem. It is not something that you need to seek out and expect to see your next favorite Sega arcade racing game. It's right in the middle. And that's interesting for Sega because most of their arcade racing games do not sit in the middle. They're some of the best arcade racing games of all time, and every once in a while they release a complete dud. Daytona USA 3 is one of those rare games that straddles both of those worlds. Not amazing, not terrible. And it is unfortunate that we can't play this game with multiple players. That would be a lot of fun to be able to experience it. And I have not seen an arcade cabinet for this for the longest time. It didn't seem to do very well in arcades, and maybe that's why it didn't get ported home. But you can still spin a 180 in the last turn and win another race. And I do appreciate how this game gives you just enough challenge to challenge you, but not so much to frustrate you. That's not usually what Sega racing games will do. And again, we just get some fun tracks. I do wish they had done more with this game though. I don't know why this is what they chose, probably just down to complete budget. Reuse some assets, make new graphical elements, release a game and sell it to arcade operators. It makes sense from a financial standpoint, and we do need to remember this is not classic era Sega that probably had a ton of money. This was modern era Sega that is not the biggest developer around anymore. And you will see sometimes when you start bouncing across the wall, the physics will get a little bit wonky. I have played an original cabinet, and I will say the physics get wonky in that as well. Every once in a while that driving and handling mechanic just completely breaks down. It seems like there's an issue with some of the collision. The good thing is if you just don't hit the wall, you don't have to deal with that problem, but the AI will do the exact same thing. They're going to be bouncing off the wall as well, and in some spots it just seems like the power of your vehicle and the handling versus the turning radius are incompatible, and you really have to slow down a ton to be able to make that corner, sometimes almost to an unfair degree. But I can say that about some tracks in Daytona USA 2 as well. There's one turn that I always go into the wall. I just feel like it's a little bit too tight. That just might be me as well. It might be down to my driving and my thought that if you just jam on the gas, you must be doing something right. But it's unfortunate that this game wasn't better, but it's great that we're able to play it. It's one of those things that's part of the pantheon of Sega arcade racing games, and the fact that Sega made that boo-boo and accidentally just released the whole thing on their website with no password behind it is amazing. Those things don't usually happen, and I'm always giving Sega crap in these videos about not porting their best arcade games home, so I'm glad someone made that mistake. Part of me thinks it wasn't a mistake at all. Part of me thinks there's someone else at Sega that wants these games in players' hands at home, and they just wink wink nudge nudge kind of forgot to obscure that link. It's probably not true. It probably was a real mistake, but a man can dream, can't he? But Daytona USA 3 is just fun, and it's fun to see Sega continuing making racing games. And I do feel bad for this game, the developers, because it pretty much got widely panned when it came out. And I'm not trying to say that it didn't deserve some of that critique, I'm just trying to say it didn't deserve all of it. But when you're drifting into a corner and you're racing well in this game, it is a ton of fun, and it is a game that you should definitely check out and play. It's not the best thing Sega's ever made, but it certainly isn't the worst either. Short of that, that's Daytona USA 3. I'll be back next Wednesday with more Sega racing, and I'll have videos throughout the week as well. But if you have a chance, play this game. Bye-bye.